You, of course, remember that this is the third Sunday in a row that we've had healing stories in the gospel, right? Just nod, humor me. Okay. You remember that. So a couple of weeks ago, Jesus healed a man who was possessed with unclean spirits. Last week, Jesus healed Simon's mother-in-law and other people who were sick. Today, Jesus heals this leprous man. Mark wants us to notice different things. When Jesus healed the people with unclean spirits, he did it simply by word. When he healed Simon's mother-in-law, he took her by the hand and raised her up without a word. Today, in this story, we hear that Jesus touches the man with leprosy and then speaks the word of healing. In that is a special message for us that Jesus wants us to think about. You'll all remember that it would be, and it's 4 years ago next month, when COVID started spreading across the globe. And we didn't know what we were in for. We didn't know how it started. We didn't know how to stop it. We didn't know how to clean or whatever. We weren't sure how it was being transmitted. And we shut everything down to try to protect people, to contain it. Schools, hospitals, schools and businesses and churches shut down so that we could contain the spread. We weren't sure what we were dealing with. And it was a scary time. In the time of Jesus, this is what leprosy was like. They didn't necessarily know how leprosy started, how it spread. There was no cure for it. And the only thing to do, as we heard in the first reading, was to isolate those with leprosy. They even forced them to wear clothes that were torn and to dishevel their hair so that people could see from a distance. They had to walk around saying, "Unclean, unclean," to keep people away from them. All because of fear of catching the disease. And even people with simple skin diseases, because they didn't know what it was, were branded as lepers and forced to live outside. They were not only forced to live outside of the towns, but if you think about it, that meant that they were forced to live apart from their families and their friends. They were isolated from community. And they had to go through this horrible disease to death by themselves or maybe with other lepers. They were untouchables. By Jesus reaching out to touch this man as he healed him, he showed us that there are no untouchables. His healing action and his words remind us that we, if we are disciples of Jesus, if we are going to imitate Jesus, then we have to be open to helping those who are on the fringes, those most in need, those who might be banished to the edges of our society. This is one of the things that Pope Francis has talked about since the beginning of his Petrine ministry. As a matter of fact, when Jorge Bergoglio won the election in the conclave, and they realized that he had all the votes that he needed to become Pope, the cardinal next to him tapped him on the arm and said, "Jorge, don't forget the poor." One of the reasons that Pope Francis took the name Francis. But from the beginning of his papacy, he has shown his willingness to go to the fringes, to the outlying parts of our society. A very interesting thing that he did early in his papacy was to go to the island of Lampedusa. Lampedusa is a small island right off the coast of Italy in the Mediterranean Sea. It's part of Italy. Thousands of people were trying to flee all kinds of things in Africa, from war and violence to starvation to autocratic governments, trying to make their way to Europe with the hope of making a new life. If they could just get to Lampedusa, if they could just get their foot on the island, they would have a foothold in Europe. They would have a chance for a new beginning. But many of these people died on the journey. They were packed into boats that were not safe, overcrowded. The people who arranged the travel took exorbitant amounts of money and didn't guarantee their safety, and many were dying just trying to get to safety. Pope Francis wanted to go to visit that island, to be with these people, literally on the fringe of society. So he called in the Secretary of State, Cardinal Bertone. Now, the Secretary of State is the one who organizes all the Pope's official trips. So he calls in Cardinal Bertone and he says, Eminenza. He says, I want to go to Lampedusa. Cardinal Bertone says, oh, Your Holiness, it's just so new in your papacy. You really have to take time. Get your feet planted, figure out what you're doing, kind of take the lay of the land. Maybe in a few months, 6 months, we can talk about a trip. Francis nodded and Bertone left. A couple of weeks later, he calls Bertone in again. Eminenza, I want to go to Lampedusa. Excellent. Your Holiness, if you set foot outside the Vatican into the city of Rome, it's an international trip. International trips, we have to go through all the diplomatic hoops. We have to get the security in place. These take 2 years to organize. And Bertone leaves. A couple of days later, Cardinal Bertone got a telephone call from Alitalia, the official Italian airline. Someone named Jorge Bergoglio just made a reservation for Lampedusa. The Pope was determined to go. I'm sure Cardinal Bertone made the fastest run from his office to the Pope's office when he hung up that phone. The Pope made the trip. It wasn't earth-shattering. There weren't thousands and thousands of people there, but it was symbolic of what we do as disciples of Jesus, to reach out to those on the margins, those most in need. So he got there. So he was elected in April. He got there in July. And by August, Cardinal Bertone had a new job. The Pope was serious. This is what Jesus is teaching us today in the gospel. I think a way that we can see ourselves here is how he's teaching us that we need to reach out to the untouchables of our own time, of our own society. There are two major problems facing some Canadians right now. We hear a lot about it on the news, but I'm not sure we're all doing enough about it. Homelessness or home insecurity and food insecurity. 20% of the population of Canada do not have decent accommodations, a decent home. 20% of us. A lot of people living on very meager pensions are afraid of their rent being raised because it'll be a choice between rent or food, maybe a choice between food or medicine. They're afraid that if they're evicted for a renovation, that they're not going to find another place at such a rate. All kinds of problems. More people wanting to come to this country. Our government used to have a good program for housing, which got stopped years ago in some economic downturn. And now they're making some efforts. But we have to realize that they are spending our money. We call it tax dollars. And we tell our elected politicians at the federal, the provincial, and the municipal levels how we want our tax dollars spent. Oh, they came up with a budget, but we tell them it's our money. And I think this is one of the things that we can do to really rally the forces, rally the troops, rally the interest to make it known to the government that they have to do more for the people who are homeless or facing home insecurity. We don't see a lot of them around Mount Carmel or even Grand Bend where I live, but they're there. Food insecurity. We've so many people, we hear the stories, especially at Christmas, of all the food banks that got lots of donations, but also ran out of the food. The soup kitchens where people are lining up and visiting. These were meant to be temporary measures in another economic downturn, but they've become a way of life for some people. And we know that if people don't eat properly, then the kids can't concentrate in school. If the kids can't concentrate in school, they're not going to get a good education. And lacking a good education is also going to mean other health problems. If they're making a choice between rent and medicine or food and medicine, they're not going to have good health. And good health will lead to chronic health. We need to help the people on the margins. We need to tell our government leaders what we expect them to do. So, if the gospel teaches us anything today, it's that no one is untouchable. All should have the right, especially to housing and food, good education, all those things that are rights that many of us take for granted or work hard for, but nevertheless, that we need to reach out to make sure that those of our brothers and sisters on the margin will not be forgotten. As we celebrate the Mass today, let us pray for the wisdom and the strength to do that work, to help those in our society most in need.